Hello, and welcome to today's Fiscal Year 2024 Flood Mitigation Assistance Amendment Notice of Funding Opportunity webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to give a few housekeeping notes on today's Zoom webinar. This session is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the FEMA.gov webinar page in the coming days. All participants are currently on mute to minimize background noise, and cameras are turned off for this webinar format. Please use the Q&A feature to submit questions at any time during the webinar. We have a team of subject matter experts reviewing and preparing answers in the background, and will provide answers to as many questions as possible at the end of the session. To turn on closed captioning in Zoom, click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. If you experience any technical issues, try refreshing your browser or rejoining the session. You can also use the Q&A pod at the bottom of the screen for additional assistance. At the end of the session, you'll see a brief survey pop up. We'd really appreciate your feedback to help improve future webinars. At this time, I'd like to introduce Victoria Barton, Associate Administrator for the Office of External Affairs, who will be taking us through the opening remarks. Victoria?
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. We really appreciate you joining us today. I want to first begin by thanking you for your patience during the recent funding lapse that impacted FEMA's operations. The DHS shutdown earlier this year was a challenging period for our workforce, our agency, and most importantly, I know it affected many of you, the communities and government partners that we serve. Today, we are focused on the amended Fiscal Year 2024 Flood Mitigation Assistance Funding opportunity for $600 million. This funding opportunity was previously published and is now revised to incorporate recent federal guidance and to align with the overarching national goals for federal grants. Our goal is to empower state, local, and territorial governments, as well as federally recognized tribal nations, to reduce or eliminate the risk of repetitive flood damage to buildings and infrastructure. We are confident these revisions will deliver results and make America safer. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Program enables community leaders across the country to better prepare for floods, which are the most common and expensive natural disaster in the country. When done correctly, mitigation activities save lives and reduce the cost of future disasters. FEMA is committed to strengthening local resilience and delivering efficient, accountable support to communities. We appreciate your time today, and I really hope that everyone here can really take advantage of the time for questions and answers as we open it up later in the segment today, so that we can address many of your questions and help support all of you as you're applying for this funding opportunity. Once again, I want to thank you all for making the time for being here today, and I'm going to hand it back over to our program team to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Before we dive into the details of the Fiscal Year 2024 Flood Mitigation Assistance Amended Funding Opportunity, let's take a look at what's on our agenda today. We'll start by providing an overview of some of the most important aspects that eligible applicants and sub-applicants need to know during the Fiscal Year 2024 grant cycle. Our next topic will focus on the Flood Mitigation Assistance Annual Opportunity, its priorities, and how you can leverage its funding for flood mitigation projects and activities. Then we'll discuss the application process using FEMA Grants Outcomes, also known as FEMA Go, offering insights into successfully navigating the system. We will also provide information on the resources available to support your grant application and project implementation processes after the award has been obligated. Participants will have an opportunity to ask questions, and closing remarks will wrap up our presentation today. Our goal is to equip you with the knowledge and tools needed to make the most of this grant program and to enhance the resilience of your communities. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program reduces or eliminates the risk of repetitive flood damage to buildings insured under the National Flood Insurance Program within participating communities. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program was authorized by legislative acts in 1994, 2012, and 2021. The National Flood Insurance Reform Act of 1994 initially authorized the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program, which was further strengthened by the Biggert-Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2012 and reauthorized in 2021. The mission of the program is to reduce or eliminate the risk of repetitive flood damage to buildings insured under the National Flood Insurance Program. It is a competitive program offered annually with a specific application, review, and selection period. Local communities who participate and are in good standing with the National Flood Insurance Program are known as subapplicants, can apply through eligible applicants comprised of eligible states, federally recognized tribes, and U.S. territories to FEMA. It is important to note that communities should be in regular contact in the appropriate state agency, as they have their own submission deadlines, required formats, and state priorities that must be addressed. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Program was designed to reinforce flood insurance and floodplain management policies. It accomplishes these goals by mitigating partially or completely high-risk repetitive or severe repetitive loss properties or structures. The program enhances the nation's flood preparedness and resilience by supporting the FEMA mitigation mission. Now, I'll turn it over to Morgan, who will provide background and eligibility information on our fiscal year 2024 Flood Mitigation Assistance amended funding opportunity. Morgan?
Thank you, Brandon. Now I'll dive into the specifics for the fiscal year 2024 Flood Mitigation Assistance Amendment funding opportunity. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program makes federal funds available to states, U.S. territories, federally recognized tribal governments, and local governments to reduce or eliminate the risk of repetitive flood damage to structures insured under the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP. Prospective flood mitigation assistance applicants include all 50 states, U.S. territories, federally recognized tribal nations, and the District of Columbia. Sub-applicants can be local governments, tribal nations, state agencies, and tribal agencies. Local communities, sub-applicants, can apply through eligible applicants if they are participating and in good standing with the National Flood Insurance Program. Sub-applications are usually developed at the local level and submitted to the state. It is important to note that applicants may have their own priorities and/or requirements when screening their sub-applications. Sub-applicants cannot apply directly to FEMA. They need to submit their applications to their state, territory, or tribal agency. The agency reviews the applications and sends them to FEMA. Sub-applicants should check with their agency to make sure they meet the application deadlines. States may have already begun their notice of intent phase. Local communities should reach out to their state officials to find out more about the process their state will undertake as the result of these funding opportunities. For federally recognized tribes, you may be able to apply either as a direct applicant to FEMA or as a sub-applicant to a state. There are varying scenarios for both, depending on tribal and state laws in your jurisdiction. Please reach out to your FEMA tribal liaison to discuss the options available to you. All applicants and sub-applicants must be participating in the National Flood Insurance Program and not be withdrawn, on probation, or suspended. Verify a community's current NFIP community status via the Community Status Book on FEMA.gov. If your application previously if you submitted an application previously under the original 2024 Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Funding Program in January or February 2025, the application will not be reviewed and will be designated as not selected. These applications will need to be resubmitted. We recognize this creates additional work and sincerely appreciate the significant time and effort you invested into the previous application cycle. We encourage you to update your materials in accordance with the amended 2024 funding opportunity and submit a new application during this application period. Your continued partnership and commitment to flood mitigation are greatly valued. As with all hazard mitigation assistance programs, FEMA requires applicants and sub-applicants to maintain FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plans, both at the application deadline and when funding is obligated. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Program has additional requirements. As funds are appropriated from the National Flood Insurance Program policyholders, including sub-applicants must be active participants in the National Flood Insurance Program without probation or suspension. And all structures and project sub-applications must be insured by the National Flood Insurance Program throughout the mitigation process. For further details on eligibility, please refer to the complete Fiscal Year 2024 Flood Mitigation Assistance Amendment Notice of Funding Opportunity on grants.gov. Please note that it is extremely important for applicants and sub-applicants to verify their status using the Community Status Book on FEMA.gov and to consult with their state hazard mitigation officer. When deciding which projects are best for your community or tribe, be sure to consult the 2025 Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program Policy Guide, available at FEMA.gov. This resource outlines all eligible activities. The Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program funds 3 types of projects: capability and capacity building activities, localized flood risk reduction projects, and individual flood mitigation projects. To qualify, projects must reduce repetitive flood damage to NFIP-insured buildings, be cost-effective, align with your hazard mitigation plan, and meet environmental and historic preservation requirements. All applicants must have a FEMA-approved state or tribal standard or enhanced mitigation plan by the application deadline and at the time of obligation of award. All sub-applicants are required to have a FEMA-approved local or tribal mitigation plan by the application deadline and at time of obligation of grant funds, or FEMA regional approval for extraordinary circumstances, EC, by the application deadline. For EC, FEMA regional approval must be attached to the project sub-application. Capability and capacity building activities, mitigation plans sub-applications are exempt from the hazard mitigation plan requirement for sub-applicants only. Now a bit on benefit cost analysis, or BCA. FEMA requires all hazard mitigation projects to be cost-effective. FEMA generally assesses the cost-effectiveness of hazard mitigation projects through a benefit cost analysis. a quantitative analysis used to assess the cost effectiveness of a hazard mitigation measure by comparing the project's avoided future damage benefits to the cost over the project lifetime. The results is a benefit cost ratio, or BCR, which is the numerical expression of the cost effectiveness of a project calculated as the net present value of total project benefits divided by the net present value of total project cost. A project is generally considered to be cost-effective when the BCR is 1.0 or greater, indicating the benefits of a prospective hazard mitigation project are sufficient to justify the cost. Through the development of the BCA toolkit, FEMA created a standardized methodology that is specific to hazard mitigation activities and provides consistency across applicants and subapplicants. Processes for cost effectiveness determination methods and standard values will be documented and made publicly available on FEMA's BCA webpage. Pre-calculated benefits are available for some project types, including acquisitions within the Special Flood Hazard Area, or SFHA, acquisitions of repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss properties located outside the SFHA, elevations in the SFHA, and mitigation reconstruction in the SFHA. Using pre-calculated benefits value does not change the eligibility requirement for developing detailed cost estimate. A project's cost estimate must be based on industry standards, vendor or construction estimates, or other reliable and defensible sources. Pre-calculated benefits are available for some project types as shown in the slide. Additional information on demonstrating cost effectiveness may be found in the 2024 Funding Opportunity, HMA Program and Policy Guide, and FEMA.gov. The National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, helps mitigate the impacts of flooding throughout the flood risk maps, floodplain management standards, and flood insurance. NFIP data enables community planners, state officials, and supporting organizations to develop hazard mitigation plans, manage flood zone risks, apply for flood-specific grants, and improve community and state resilience. FEMA offers publicly available NFIP data online. FEMA's new State, Tribe, and Territory Information Agreement, STT, expands and expedites the data sharing between STTs and their partners. Once a state has signed an STT agreement with FEMA, a community does not need to sign an additional agreement with FEMA to receive NFIP, Personally Identifiable Information, or PII. Data from the state, because the state is curating and providing the data to a community, only the state needs to have a signed agreement with FEMA access to PII data. To request NFIP PII, please contact your state hazard mitigation officer or state NFIP coordinator. To initiate an agreement for your state, tribal nation, or territory, please contact your FEMA Regional Flood Insurance Liaison. Next, I'll turn it to Ali. He will provide information about flood mitigation assistance program details.
Thank you, Morgan. In this section, we will discuss the changes for this amendment, as well as the funding available, key dates, eligible activities, and other program details, sub-applicants and applicants need to know to submit their application. The application period for the fiscal year 2024 Flood Mitigation Assistance Amendment Funding Opportunity will close on Thursday, August 6, 2026 at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. It is important to note that applications submitted after the deadline will not be accepted. If you experience technical issues outside your control, you must notify FEMA as soon as possible and before the application deadline. Timely notification is defined as contacting FEMA prior to the deadline 3 p.m. Eastern Time, Thursday, August 6th, and within 48 hours of becoming aware of the issue. Failure to notify FEMA promptly may prevent your application from being considered. Please be aware that no new system-related issues will be addressed after the application deadline. FEMA unpublished the FY 2024 funding opportunity in February 2025. Applicants who applied in January and February 2025 are encouraged to update their submissions in accordance with the amended FY 2024 funding opportunity and submit a new application during this open application period. The amended FY 2024 Flood Mitigation Assistance Notice of Funding Opportunity now reflects several updates. Language from the original NOFO has been removed to ensure alignment with the executive orders. The application period has been reopened, and there are updates to federal enhanced cost share funding. Additionally, changes have been made to the final priority scoring criteria and associated tiebreakers, as well as updates to benefit cost analysis for hazard mitigation projects, environmental planning and historic preservation compliance, and Build America, Buy America Act requirements. As mentioned earlier, the FY 2024 Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program offers a total of $600 million in available funding. This funding is distributed across three main categories. First, up to $60 million is allocated for capability and capacity building activities. These activities are designed to enhance the knowledge, skills, and expertise of the workforce, helping to expand or improve the administration of the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. The next category is localized flood risk reduction projects, with up to $420 million available. These projects aim to address community flood risks and ultimately reduce National Flood Insurance Program flood claim payments. Finally, at least $120 million is reserved for individual flood mitigation projects. These projects focus on mitigating the risks of flooding for individual buildings insured under the NFIP. For the fiscal year 2024, up to $60 million is available to support capability and capacity building activities. These activities are designed to enhance the knowledge, skills, and expertise of the current workforce, strengthening the administration of the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. They also help lay the groundwork for future localized flood risk reduction projects and individual flood mitigation projects, with the ultimate goal of reducing claims against the NFIP. Additional capability and capacity building activities may include partnership development for eligible mitigation efforts, improving local floodplain management, developing strategies for severe repetitive loss or repetitive loss properties, establishing substantial damage procedures, and other eligible activities defined by statute. Both capability and capacity building activities and the localized flood risk reduction projects are supported by 75% federal cost share. The graphic presented illustrates the final priority scoring criteria for capability and capacity building activities. Points are awarded for developing repetitive loss strategies or substantial damage procedures, participating in community rating systems, and engaging in the Cooperating Technical Assistance Partner Program. FEMA will use these criteria to select the highest scoring eligible sub-applications for capability and capacity building activities, ensuring that the funding is directed to those with the greatest potential impact. Next, I'll pass it to Laura, who will speak about localized flood risk reduction projects and individual flood mitigation projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. For fiscal year 2024, up to $420 million is available to support localized flood risk reduction projects. These projects are specifically designed to mitigate community flood risk and reduce National Flood Insurance Program flood claim payments. Each sub-application may request funding for eligible projects up to a $50 million activity cap. Projects can include floodwater management, restoration, stormwater control, and flood control initiatives that offer multiple benefits, such as hazard reduction and social and environmental improvements. Like capability and capacity building activities, localized flood risk reduction projects are eligible for up to a 75% federal cost share. The final priority scoring criteria for localized flood risk reduction project activities includes points for several factors: being a National Flood Insurance Program policyholder, addressing flood mitigation assistance and National Flood Insurance Program severe repetitive loss and repetitive loss properties, demonstrating high claims resilience, conducting flood mitigation assistance capability and capacity building activities, and participating in both the Community Rating System and the Cooperating Technical Assistance Partners Program. FEMA will use these criteria to select the highest scoring eligible sub-applications for localized flood risk reduction projects, ensuring that funding is awarded to those projects with the greatest potential impact. To continue with localized flood risk reduction projects, let's talk about benefiting area maps. Localized flood risk reduction projects must showcase benefits to National Flood Insurance Program insured properties. One way to do this is for the application to include a hydrologic and hydraulic study with a map and geospatial files, outlining the project area, footprint boundary, and the benefiting area in line with flood modeling. The graphic provides an example of how the benefiting area maps should be submitted in an application for this project type. Now we'll discuss phased projects. The graphic depicts processes of phased projects, starting from the sub-application submission and ending at phase 2. Communities seeking federal funding for project development and evaluation can benefit from this approach without the financial risk of non-selection or lacking upfront capital. It streamlines complex projects by dividing them into manageable phases and enables comprehensive development of technical and environmental data before granting full construction approval. Phased project funds are used to develop the necessary technical and environmental information, such as design, engineering studies, and permitting, before issuing a full construction approval. There must be enough information in the sub-application to validate the technical feasibility of the proposed solution and how it will resolve the identified flooding issue. Publicly available flood insurance study data would be an example of data that fulfills this requirement. Phased projects are especially useful for communities that cannot leverage upfront capital for project development, such as hydrologic and hydraulic studies, benefit cost analysis, etc., unless they know their project will be selected for further review. It provides a cushion for the uncertainty of being selected for an expensive and potentially resource-heavy application. At least $120 million is available for individual flood mitigation projects in fiscal year 2024. These projects are designed to reduce the National Flood Insurance Program's financial exposure by mitigating flood risks to individual National Flood Insurance Program insured structures and incentivizing flood mitigation efforts that benefit communities. There is no activity cap per sub-application. Eligible projects include acquisition and demolition or relocation of structures, structure elevation, mitigation reconstruction with a federal share up to $220,000, wet and dry floodproofing of non-residential structures, and dry floodproofing of historic residential structures. For detailed definitions and prioritization of these projects, please refer to the fiscal year 2024 FMA amended Notice of Funding Opportunity. Individual flood mitigation projects offer several federal cost share options. For properties defined by flood mitigation assistance as severe repetitive loss, up to 100% federal cost share funding is available. For properties classified as repetitive loss, the federal cost share can be up to 90%. If neither of these higher cost shares applies, projects may receive up to 75% federal cost share funding. Individual flood mitigation projects are evaluated using a two-tiered priority system. In the first tier, projects are prioritized if they will mitigate flood damage to at least 75% of the severe repetitive loss or repetitive loss structures included in the sub-application, following program priority. Structures submitted must meet the Flood Mitigation Assistance or National Flood Insurance Program definitions for severe repetitive loss or repetitive loss. For more details on these definitions and prioritization, please refer to the NOFO. Once FEMA has selected all sub-applications in the first tier, the second tier applies the final priority scoring criteria. This includes consideration of substantial damage, flood mitigation assistance and National Flood Insurance Program severe repetitive loss and repetitive loss properties, and flood mitigation assistance capability and capacity building activities. In addition to the tiered priorities for individual flood mitigation projects, FEMA may rank sub-applications lower if the average federal cost share for elevation exceeds $250,000 per single dwelling unit, or if the average federal cost share for acquisition exceeds $750,000 per single dwelling unit. FEMA may also prioritize individual properties from sub-applications if the replacement cost value or actual cash value of a structure is less than $750,000. This value is listed on the National Flood Insurance Program policy and is reviewed during FEMA's national screening process. This graphic highlights several examples of flood mitigation assistance mitigation projects. Clockwise from the top right, these include establishing local community partnerships, acquiring and demolishing high-risk structures, restoring floodplains, enhancing local drainage capacity, acquiring properties to reduce future risk, and elevating homes that have experienced repetitive flooding. And now we'll transition back to Morgan to speak about application best practices.
Thank you, Laura. As we move into the next section, we'll focus on application best practices and minimum eligibility requirements for FMA. These slides are designed to help applicants and subapplicants avoid common pitfalls and ensure their submission meets program standards. We'll cover what FEMA looks for in a complete and eligible project application, including key documentation, scope of work, and alignment with program priorities. By following these best practices and understanding eligibility criteria, you can maximize your chances of success. As you're working on your subapplication, it's important to double check that it meets all eligibility requirements. These are some of the most common reasons subapplications are found ineligible during the eligibility and completeness reviews. Taking the time to ensure your subapplication is complete and aligns with these requirements will help your project move forward smoothly. The NOFO and HMA policy guide are great resources to help guide you to meet each of these requirements. Does the applicant or subapplicant have an approved mitigation plan at the time of the application period close? Applicants and subapplicants must have a FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plan in place by the application deadline. If the plan is missing or expired, the subapplication is automatically ineligible. Are all applicants participating in the NFIP and not withdrawn, on probation, or suspended? All applications must be participating in the National Flood Insurance Program and not be withdrawn, on probation, or suspended. Structures eligible for the individual flood mitigation projects must have an active NFIP policy, including a group flood insurance policy, in effect prior to the opening of the application period, and the policy must be maintained throughout the life of the structure. And at least 75% of the structures included in the subapplication must meet the FMA or NFIP definition of SRL or RL property. Is the activity eligible in the program? The proposed activity must be eligible under Flood Mitigation Assistance as defined in the NOFO and program guidance. Is the applicant/subapplicant eligible? Only eligible entities can apply. We covered this earlier in the presentation. Is there confirmation that the project does not duplicate other federally funded programs? The project cannot duplicate funding or activities already covered by other federal programs. If there's duplication, the subapplication will be found ineligible. When checking for completeness, check to see, is the scope of work complete and well described? The scope of work must be clear, detailed, and aligned with the project's goals, schedule, and budget. Incomplete or vague descriptions are a common reason for an application to be deemed ineligible. Was a detailed budget submitted? A comprehensive, itemized budget must be included. Lump sum budgets or missing budget details are not accepted and will result in ineligibility. If your project requires a benefit cost analysis, BCA, did you submit a complete BCA demonstrating cost effectiveness? For projects that require a BCA, the analysis must be included and demonstrate cost effectiveness. Missing or incomplete BCAs are a frequent reason for denial. FEMA benefit cost analysis must utilize a 7% discount rate when calculating the present value for future benefits and cost for mitigation projects. Is the project under $1 million? If the project is under $1 million, you must submit a narrative that includes qualitative and quantitative data demonstrating the benefit and cost effectiveness of the project. We frequently encounter issues with flood mitigation assistance subapplications, but there are several best practices that can help address these challenges. One key takeaway is the importance of submitting complete and well-organized documentation. Missing or unclear attachments often lead to ineligibility. So it's recommended to use clear, acronym-free titles that accurately reflect your project's activities. When preparing your budget, remember to include costs for environmental compliance or permitting that's needed. For environmental and historic preservation, EHP, compliance review, be sure to provide accurate GPS coordinates, correspondence, or permits from regulatory agencies, construction dates for impacted structures and outbuildings, correspondence with state or tribal historic preservation officers, maps, photos, design drawings, and other relevant materials. The EHP checklist in the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Policy Guide, or FEMA Go, can help ensure your sub-application is as complete as possible. Another common mistake involves management costs. Make sure to request these in the correct place and at the right time, as additional funds cannot be added later. If you're uncertain about any requirements or how to categorize your project, reach out to your state hazard mitigation officer, tribal liaison, or FEMA regional office for guidance. Think of your application as telling a story. Every section, from the scope and budget to the schedule and supporting documents, should reinforce a consistent message and demonstrate that you've carefully considered all the details. Many issues with technical feasibility stem from unclear or missing information and documentation. It's also common for applications to lack a clear description of the level of protection or fall short of meeting required design standards. When developing your sub-application, remember that technical feasibility is about proving your project is not just a good idea on paper, but that it's achievable, safe, and effective in practice. FEMA reviewers need to be confident that your project can be built as proposed, will function as intended, and will genuinely reduce risk. This requires your application to be internally consistent and supported by credible technical evidence. It's important to go beyond simply stating that your project will work. You need to show how and why. Using recognized standards and clear documentation, this approach helps FEMA quickly verify your project's readiness and effectiveness. Ultimately, demonstrating a strong technical feasibility makes your project more competitive and increases the likelihood that it will move forward smoothly if selected for funding. One common pitfall for sub-applicants has to do with determining benefit cost. FEMA needs to see that benefits of your project clearly outweigh the cost. The benefit cost analysis, or BCA, is how you demonstrate this. A strong BCA is more than just running the numbers. It's about providing clear, well-supported evidence for every input and assumption. For example, missing building-specific information like type, use, or lowest floor elevation, or unclear data about the population served by utilities can make it difficult for reviewers to validate your project's benefits. One of the most common pitfalls we see is submitting inconsistent or incomplete BCA documentation. This includes cases where multiple BCAs are submitted, the benefit cost ratio in the sub-application doesn't match the attachments, or the analysis can't be recreated with the provided documentation. Reviewers need to be able to follow your calculations and understand your data sources. It's also essential to use the correct BCA tools and modules. Using the wrong approach or applying pre-calculated benefits when they don't fit the project can result in the application being deemed ineligible. Other frequent issues can involve using unclear or unsupported information as the basis for estimating damage when calculating and presenting BCA information, or when scenario events aren't justified with solid information. Make sure your supporting documentation matches your analysis and use justification whenever possible. On many occasions, the cost-effectiveness narrative for projects under $1 million does not have enough information to develop a benefit cost ratio. Following FEMA's instructions, submit a complete narrative that includes qualitative and quantitative data demonstrating the benefit and cost effectiveness of the project. Next, I'll pass it on to Jessica, who will speak about environmental planning and historic preservation.
Thank you, Morgan. As a reminder, all projects receiving federal funding must be compliant with environmental and historic preservation laws. A common pitfall we see is neglecting to incorporate EHP requirements into the development of the project and sub-application at the very beginning. A best practice is to identify potential natural and cultural impacts early in project planning, including any required permits or resource surveys, and then incorporating them into the project's budget and timeline. This can really streamline your review and avoid delays. It's understood that each sub-application will be different based on complexity or stage of development, but a complete sub-application includes as much EHP documentation as available. In addition to the requirements discussed early, including details such as site descriptions, locations of equipment and material staging, information about proposed ground disturbing activities like utility relocation or foundation removal, and correspondence with a state or federal resource or regulatory agency like the State Historic Preservation Office, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, National Marine Fisheries Service, or the Army Corps of Engineers are all really important and can help improve review timelines and limit duplication of effort. As the adage goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words, so include photos, design drawings, and maps as you can. You'll upload any environmental documentation and clearly reference them in your sub-application. Including these is essential for EHP compliance review, and again, can reduce the number of requests for information or requests for additional information. Remember, the EHP checklist should be used as a tool to develop the most complete sub-application possible. Additional EHP resources are available via various technical job aids at FEMA.gov using environmental as the keyword search. And for compliance troubleshooting, please don't hesitate to use the EHP resources in this presentation or in the NOFO. And now I'll pass it to Katya, who will speak about how to apply in FEMA Go.
Thank you, Jessica. Great. Next, we'll talk about applying to this program in the FEMA Grants Outcome System, or FEMA Go, and the important deadlines. So, how to apply? Eligible applicants must apply for funding using FEMA Grants Outcomes, FEMA Go, at the FEMA Go portal. And as a reminder, applicants who previously submitted applications during the initial FY24 cycle in early 2025 must create new applications in FEMA Go. Technical user manuals and support materials are available on the FEMA Go site for hazard mitigation assistance grants. The application period will close at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, August 6, 2026. Any system-related issues will be addressed by FEMA until 3 p.m. Eastern Time on August 6, 2026. All applications must be received in FEMA Go before the application period deadline. Okay, and we're going to break down the difference between first-time FEMA Go users and returning. If you're a first-time FEMA Go user, start by determining whether you're applying as an applicant or a subapplicant. If you're applying as a subapplicant, connect with the organization that will be submitting the grant application, such as your state, tribal, or territorial government. Next, confirm that your SAM.gov account and Unique Entity Identifier, or UEI, are active. Set up a login.gov account using your work email. You'll also need to connect with the eBiz POC listed on your SAM.gov account to add an authorized organization representative, AOR, to your team. For additional information and troubleshooting, refer to the FEMA Go Startup Guide. Now, if you're a returning FEMA Go user, make sure your SAM.gov account and UEI are active and renewed annually. As an AOR, review your team members, update roles, and remove anyone who is no longer with your organization. It's important to have at least one AOR on the team. Having redundancy is helpful in case that person leaves. Ensure all team members can successfully log in. For more details, consult the FEMA Go Startup Guide. Okay, the authorized organization representative, or AOR, must create the grant application before sub-applications can be created. Once the AOR signs assurances and certifications, an application ID is generated. Sub-applications can then be linked to the grant and submitted for review. The AOR reviews each sub-application and submits them to FEMA individually. The submission status changes from pending once that first sub-application is submitted in the system. Sub-application overview. So the sub-organization authorized representative, or SAR, is responsible for creating the sub-application and linking it to the parent organization through which it will be submitted. It's important to note that once the sub-application is submitted to FEMA, you cannot change the title or sub-application type. Management cost applications are reserved for grant-level applicants only, while sub-applications have subrecipient management costs built into the budget section. Each section of the sub-application allows for document uploads to support your submission. For additional guidance, refer to the FEMA Go Pass-Through Application and Sub-Application Guide. Adding subrecipient management costs. These screenshots show where to find and enter subrecipient management costs in FEMA Go. Flood Mitigation Assistance subrecipient management costs do not share the 100% cost share found in other hazard mitigation assistance grant programs. The maximum cost share on management costs for flood mitigation assistance subawards matches that of the overall project. For example, if the subapplicant has a federal cost share of 90%, then the subrecipient management cost share can be up to 90%. SRMC can be up to 5% of your total subapplication budget. Be sure to clearly label and justify each item. Remember, your subrecipient management costs must be included at the time when you apply. You cannot add it later. Double check your budget before submitting. To add subrecipient management costs in FEMA Go, you must first enter at least one other cost type, such as construction or equipment cost estimates, before the option to add management cost becomes available. Once you've entered your initial cost estimate, scroll back up to the budget section and click the blue Add Cost Type button. You'll then see management cost as an option in the drop-down menu. Select management cost and add your subrecipient management costs line items, describing what the funds will be used for, such as salaries, supplies, travel, or office space rental. Once you've selected management cost as a cost type, you'll need to add specific line items that describe how you plan to use these funds. This is an important note. Subrecipient management costs cost share must not exceed the federal cost share applied to the project. For example, if Fed share is 90%, then subrecipient management costs can be up to 90%. This is important to mention again because for other programs, like our Hazard Mitigation Grant Program and the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, the cost share is 100%. And once you've selected management costs as a cost type, you'll add your line items. Some common examples of line items include equipment, office space rentals, salaries, supplies, or even travel. Remember, each item you add should directly relate to managing and administering your FMA subaward. These costs must be reasonable and necessary. If you need to add more than one type of management cost, you can do so by selecting additional lines from the drop-down menu. Double check that your total subrecipient management cost request does not exceed 5% of your total subapplication budget, and that all items are clearly labeled and justified. Just a reminder, the federal cost share on management costs for FMA subawards matches that of the overall project. So make sure it is not funded at 100% before you move to the next step. And now I will pass it to Jessica to talk about environmental and historic preservation questions.
Thanks, Katya. The EHP review information in FEMA Go sections A through J are intended to walk sub-applicants through questions that are necessary to complete the EHP compliance review. The questions in FEMA Go are modeled after the EHP checklist that's in the HMA policy guide. You'll select yes, no, or not known for each of the questions and provide written responses as requested. FEMA staff reviews and validates this information and may request additional information if not answered completely. So the more completely and accurately these questions are answered, the less likely FEMA will need to request additional project information and can begin the compliance review. And now I'll pass it back to Brandon to speak about important resources.
Thanks, Jessica. I'll share information about program resources that may be useful as you learn more about the FMA program and start to build your application. I want to quickly highlight key resources for the fiscal year 2024 flood mitigation assistance opportunity. Please visit FEMA.gov's flood mitigation assistance page and the fiscal year 24 flood mitigation assistance notice of funding opportunity for program details and application guidance. The Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program and Policy Guide provides overall requirements of the hazard mitigation assistance programs, which include flood mitigation assistance. As mentioned, the National Flood Insurance Program Community Status Book provides community participation status and can be used to determine if your community is eligible for flood mitigation assistance funding. For useful contacts, please refer to the provided directories for state floodplain managers lists, state hazard mitigation officers, and FEMA regional offices. Subapplicants are encouraged to reach out to their state hazard mitigation officer as the primary point of contact for questions and assistance. Additional resources are also provided here for substantial damage determinations and a desk reference and estimator tool for determining substantial damage. Information also included for navigating property elevation and acquisition project types, and environmental review info details are included. Lastly, resources are provided for benefit cost analysis with a provided toolkit, which includes guidance for preparing analysis for repetitive loss projects and applicable pre-calculated benefits. All resources provided are located on FEMA.gov. Applicants should coordinate through FEMA regional office points of contact, and subapplicants should maintain contact with their state hazard mitigation officers. FEMA helplines are available to support applicants and subapplicants with application system issues, program questions, benefit cost analysis, building science guidance, and other compliance requirements. Additional helplines include for our FEMA grants outcomes or FEMA Go system support, benefit cost analysis, environmental and historic preservation, and building science publication questions. Now we'll transition over to John, who's going to lead us through some question and answer session.
Brandon, thank you very much. We have the question and answer time here. I think this is going to be really good. And Brandon, I'm asked if you can stay with me to help answer the great questions that are coming in. Let's start. Question 1. Will the PowerPoint be posted following this presentation? I think the answer is yes. Can you clarify?
Yeah, thanks for that question, John. We've recorded the session. The recording and the slides will be posted on FEMA.gov, the events page, in the coming days.
Great. Thank you very much. This next question is about applying and the practice there, the history there. Do communities need to apply again if they applied last time?
Yeah, this is a great question, John. And so, unfortunately, applicants who previously submitted an application must create a new application in the FEMA Go system. Applications that were previously submitted under the original fiscal year 2024 Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program are not going to be reviewed and will not be designated and will be designated as not selected. Applicants are encouraged to update their submissions in accordance with the amended fiscal year 2024 amended funding opportunity and submit a new application during this open application period.
Got it. Thank you. And what about hazard mitigation plan? This questioner asks, are we required to have a hazard mitigation plan to apply?
Yeah, so all applicants have to have a FEMA approved state or tribal, and that can be a standard or enhanced mitigation plan by the application deadline and at the time of obligation of the award. All sub-applications are required to have a FEMA approved local or tribal hazard mitigation plan by the application deadline and at time of obligation of the grant funds. And that's time of award. More information about the status of the FEMA approved hazard mitigation plans can be found on FEMA's hazard mitigation planning website, which we have a link for.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Brandon. This next question is about reviewing and ranking. How will sub-applications be reviewed, ranked, and prioritized for funding, and who will perform those tasks?
Yeah, it's a great question, John. So the sub-applications will be reviewed by FEMA grant program reviewers and subject matter experts. FEMA is going to perform the review according to the eligibility criteria and review process found in the funding opportunity or the notice of funding opportunity, the NOFO. More information on the review process starts on page 27, which is titled Part 7, Application Review Information of the funding opportunity. The funding opportunity is posted on grants.gov.
Okay, very good. Thank you. A follow-up question on hazard mitigation plan. A questioner asks, what if our mitigation plan is expiring by the application deadline? Could we submit an extraordinary circumstance?
Yeah, definitely, John. So there's got to be a justification for extraordinary circumstances if you don't have a FEMA approved hazard mitigation plan. Um, some of those justifications include a statement such as the jurisdiction meets the small impoverished community criteria, or the jurisdiction has been determined to have had insufficient capacity due to lack of available funding, staffing, or other necessary expertise to satisfy the mitigation planning requirement prior to the current disaster or application deadline. Subapplicants must include a copy of the extraordinary circumstances approval in the subapplication when it's submitted in FEMA Go in order to comply with the mitigation planning requirement. More information about extraordinary circumstances can be found in the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program and Policy Guide, HMA Guide version 2.1 is the latest version, or you can contact your FEMA regional office for more information.
Thank you, Brandon. Throughout the webinar, we've received multiple questions regarding FEMA Go and the system-related issues. What can you share additionally, especially about getting help?
Yeah, so FEMA Go office hours are not planned for this grant cycle. If you're experiencing system-related issues, you must notify FEMA as soon as possible before the application deadline. For technical assistance with the FEMA Go system, please contact the FEMA Go helpline by emailing femago@fema.dhs.gov or calling 1-877-585-3242. And this service is available Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. When you're submitting requests for technical assistance, please be sure to include identifying aspects such as the applicant or sub-applicant name so they can quickly find your file.
Very good, important information. Thank you. Brandon, can you tell us again which projects need a benefit cost analysis?
Yeah, so every hazard mitigation project must be analyzed for cost effectiveness, and FEMA has created a benefit cost analysis toolkit to help applicants perform benefit cost analysis in accordance with the Office of Management Budget's guidelines using a 7% discount rate. However, for specific projects, FEMA offers several streamlined methodologies as alternatives to completing the full benefit cost analysis using the BCA toolkit. One of these streamlined methodologies is for hazard mitigation assistance projects with total project costs of less than $1 million. These sub-applicants can submit a cost effectiveness narrative. The narrative needs to include enough information for FEMA to estimate the benefit cost ratio and make cost effectiveness determination. Another example is the use of what we call pre-calculated benefits. Some projects types like acquisition and elevation in the special flood hazard area allow for the use of pre-calculated benefits. Pre-calculated benefits can also be used for the acquisition of structures that are declared substantially damaged. Capacity and capability building sub-applications do not need to submit a BCA.
Thank you, Brandon. Can you help answer this question about the information agreement? What is the state, tribe, and territory information agreement for National Flood Insurance Program data with communities?
Yeah, so FEMA state, tribal, and territorial information agreement expands and expedites data sharing between these government entities and their partners. Once the information agreement is signed, a community does not need to sign an additional agreement for FEMA to receive National Flood Insurance Program personally identifiable information, also known as PII data from the state. Since the state, tribe, or territory is curating and providing the data to the community, they they're able to have a signed agreement with FEMA to access that personally identifiable information, which can include policyholder data like addresses, number of losses, and that can really help with finding, whether or not the property is severe repetitive loss or repetitive loss.
Understood. Very good. Our next question, it's very specific on a sub-application. The questioner asks, we submitted a sub-application under the previous funding opportunity in 2025, but since then, the homeowner's NFIP policy has lapsed. What will the NFIP requirements be if we are going to reapply?
Yeah, definitely. And as this is an amended opportunity that is building off of our prior NOFO, totally understand that this may happen. So structures eligible for individual flood mitigation projects like acquisition, elevation, mitigation, reconstruction must have a current national flood insurance program policy. And this could include a group flood insurance policy. The policy must be in effect prior to the opening of the application period, and the policy must be maintained throughout the life of the structure if it is mitigated. Of course, if it's an acquired structure, you wouldn't have an insurance policy after demolition. The insurance requirement of maintaining flood insurance will apply during the life of the property, regardless of transfer of ownership of such property.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Let's see here. Oh, here's one we didn't have before. What are the requirements for FMA's capability and capacity building activities, technical assistance by states to communities?
Yeah, so to be eligible to receive funding for technical assistance by states and communities, the applicant must have received Fiscal Year 23 Flood Mitigation Assistance Award of at least a $1 million federal share. FEMA will award $50,000 to each applicant that meets the eligibility criteria for this funding type.
All right, that's important information. Can I ask you about funding caps? This question says, what is the funding cap for FMA's capability and capacity building activities project scoping?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, John. So we're going to select the highest ranked eligible sub-applications for project scoping from each applicant. Awards will not exceed 900,000 total federal share, and that's per sub-application. Project scoping sub-applications must benefit the National Flood Insurance Program, and they got to do such things as reducing or eliminating future flood insurance claims. And so we'll be looking for that in the application. Funding for project scoping early in a sub-applicant's decision-making process can help facilitate the development of a viable project in his later implementation. But it is important to note that FEMA funds are limited and may be subject to change. Therefore, there's really no guarantee for future funding from the hazard mitigation assistance programs, but this really is starter funding for getting a project sub-application together.
Thank you, Brandon. That's very important to understand for CNCB. Here's another question. It's a great question. Can you clarify the requirements for building codes?
Yeah, so all activities where a mitigated structure remains, again, these are project types like elevation, mitigation, reconstruction, floodproofing, etc. They must be designed in accordance with the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP standards in 44 CFR Part 60, and the most recent edition of American Society of Civil Engineers 24 Flood Design and Construction Standard as a minimum design criteria. The current edition of ASCE 2424 was published in January of 2025. The development, adoption, evaluation, enhancement, enforcement of building codes and standards is a priority for the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program and FEMA. In the interest of building a stronger, more resilient nation, FEMA encourages all grant recipients and sub-applicants to meet current published editions of relevant consensus-based building codes, specifications, and standards, and to exceed them where feasible. Stronger codes and standards reduce risk and make communities more resilient to damage from future flood hazards.
Thank you, Brandon. And I wholeheartedly agree. And today's codes are more resilient than they've ever been in the past. So like to see them being used. Here's a question about individual mitigation project. Do FMA's individual flood mitigation project increased federal cost share percentage options, which are either up to 100-0 and or 90-10? They only apply to severe repetitive loss and repetitive loss? Can you help clarify?
Yes, this really is one of the competitive advantages applying for the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. So for individual flood mitigation projects, the federal cost share options include up to 100% federal cost share funding for flood mitigation assistance that impacts severe repetitive loss defined properties. And these definitions are provided in our 42 United States Code section 4104C H3. And there's two definitions. One is BI and BII. For repetitive loss defined properties, we offer up to a 90% federal cost share for, again, individual property mitigation like elevations, acquisition, mitigation, reconstruction, and some specific floodproofing projects. And so that definition of repetitive loss is under 42, again, United States Code section 4121A7. For all of the other flood mitigation assistance project types, we offer up to a 75% federal cost share if that higher federal cost share isn't available.
Got it. Those are important distinctions there, the different percentage levels. Brandon, we noticed in many of the questions to note, we flagged that if you are applying as a local government, to make sure you find out the applicant's internal due date, and that may not be the same due date as FEMA's date and may even be several weeks before FEMA's due date. What's important to emphasize there, please?
Yeah, so it's just important to reiterate that if you are a sub-applicant, local community, to please check in with your applicant, this is the state, and their published resources to ensure that you're meeting all of the application deadlines. You know, just want to remind folks that FEMA's application deadline for the fiscal year 2024 FMA funding opportunity is Thursday, August 6th at 3 p.m. Eastern time. But states will likely have an earlier sub-application date as they gather the sub-applications together. They have their own ranking criteria and what they will how they will choose what applications to submit up to FEMA. So just to be very aware that they'll likely have an earlier sub-application deadline.
Thank you, Brandon. I agree. Pay close attention to those due dates. I'd like to ask this next question about management costs. How much recipient management costs and subrecipient management costs are we eligible for through the FMA grant program?
Yeah, absolutely. So under the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, we're a little bit different. We have a federal cost share and a non-federal cost share cost match that has to be provided. Some of the other programs that we have 100% cost share, but due to our statutory requirements, we do have a federal share and a non-federal match that has to be provided. So applicants and sub-applicants are eligible to request up to 10% recipient management costs and 5% subrecipient management costs. And that's respective of the total cost share. And that's for management costs, and it's in accordance with 44 Code of Federal Regulations 77.7A1. And so, applicants, they're going to submit a single sub application for management costs, a separate one in FEMA Go. And sub applicants are going to submit management costs as a line item in their budget. And both of these management costs submissions should be reflective of the federal share and the non-federal cost match of the grant in which they're applying for.
Important information. Thank you so much. Brandon, this question's on a lot of folks' minds. What is happening with the fiscal year 2025 funding opportunity and beyond?
Yeah, no, this is definitely an exciting question. Looking forward to the future. So, we've been working on it, and FEMA anticipates releasing more funding opportunities for both the Flood Mitigation Assistance Annual Program, which this webinar is about today, as well as for a Flood Mitigation Assistance Swift Current Disaster-Based program. And so we'll release more details as soon as we have them available, but we are definitely working on those opportunities and hope to have more information soon.
Got it. Thank you so much. And I think we have time for one more question, Brandon. And specifically, this questioner asks, in my state, we have had recent declared flood disasters and have multiple priority projects. Should we apply to FMA or the FMA Swift Current funding opportunity for severe repetitive loss or repetitive loss properties?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is definitely a little more nuanced for a situation for a state, but the fiscal year 2024 Swift Current Amendment number 2 funding opportunity is available if an applicant received a major disaster declaration for a flood-related disaster event declared between June 1st, 2024 and May 31st, 2025, and they got to meet specific activation criteria that's provided in the NOFO. Whereas, this opportunity, the fiscal year 2024 FMA annual funding opportunity is a competitive grant opportunity, and it doesn't have any type of disaster activation criteria. Both these flood mitigation assistance opportunities do fund individual flood mitigation projects, acquisition, elevation, mitigation, reconstruction, and they really are focused on mitigating severe repetitive loss structures and repetitive loss structures, as well as substantially damaged NFIP insured structures. So applicants, they're encouraged to reach out to their FEMA regional office to confirm their eligibility for both, for the fiscal year 2024 annual program, as well as for the Swift Current funding opportunities, in order to determine what the best mix for their application should be in terms of, getting these mitigation projects put together and submitted to the right program.
Got it. So staying in touch with the FEMA regional office is very important. Well, we got through a lot of questions. Very, very good. Very good questions. And so as we finish this portion and as we get ready to close, what we're going to do is I'm happy to pass it now to Jenny Orenstein, our Director for the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Division, for our closing remarks. And Jenny?
Thank you, John, and thank you to all of our audience members. We truly appreciate your time to this very important matter today. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to the FEMA team and our partners who help support this webinar. Most importantly, thank you to our state, local, tribal, and territorial partners who are doing the work of mitigation every day. FEMA is about helping communities prevent future flood losses and enhance community resilience by funding projects, thus reducing or eliminating repetitive flood damage to insured properties. We recognize that the amended fiscal year 2024 FMA funding opportunity and the need to resubmit applications may have required additional time and effort on your part. We sincerely appreciate your patience, flexibility, and continued commitment to this program in the communities you serve. As you prepare your applications, I encourage you to focus on 3 things. First, start early. Make sure your sam.gov registration, unique entity identifier, FEMA Go access, and required documentation are in place. Second, be clear. A strong application should clearly explain the risk, the proposed solution, project readiness, and how the project will reduce future losses. And third, stay connected. Work with your FEMA regional contacts, state hazard mitigation officers, tribal liaisons, and explore technical assistance resources online at FEMA.gov. Please note that resources will soon be available on our website, and additional support may be available from FEMA regional contacts and state hazard mitigation officers. We expect applications to be highly competitive and anticipate receiving more applications than funding available. FEMA's goal is not just to receive applications. Our goal is to support strong projects that lead to stronger outcomes for communities across the country. Thank you again for your time today, your partnership, your commitment to reducing flood risk. We look forward to seeing the projects you bring forward. And one final ask before we close, please complete the webinar survey. The link is available on the screen and through the Zoom platform, and your feedback helps us improve future deliveries. Thank you.